At the time of this recording, I'm a 41-year-old black belt, and while I don't quite look this old yet, it does mean that it's been over 21 years since I started training jiu-jitsu. And if I could go back and talk to my younger 20-year-old self and give him some advice, here are 8 things that I'd tell him. Number 1, consistency over intensity. Understand that jiu-jitsu is a long game. It's a marathon, not a sprint. Maintaining a steady schedule over years is more impactful than short bursts of extreme training. If you train consistently for 2 or 3 times a week, you'll quickly be better than 90% of the people who don't train jiu-jitsu. And if you train consistently for 10 years, you'll be better than 90% of the people that do train jiu-jitsu. 3 sessions per week over time outperforms those that overtrain, often get injured, and burn out completely. This idea will become a general theme throughout the rest of this video, which brings us on to our next one. Number 2, make it easy to train consistently. When I trained most consistently, it was when I trained at Met Sarah's out in Long Island. And what I would do every day in the morning is I would pack my bag and then drive out 30 minutes to work. And along the way to my job, I would pass by the gym, which happened to be near my job. And then after work, on the way home, I would go straight to jiu-jitsu and train. I wouldn't have to go home first. And if for some reason I felt tired or decided not to train that day, I would have to pass by the gym anyway. And then later when I moved to Brooklyn and I worked at a startup, I would then have to go into Queens to go to work. And then if I wanted to train, I would have to go back into Manhattan to go to Henzo's in Midtown. So typically what would happen then is after work, I would go home, get my jiu-jitsu gear. Then I would go take the subway into Manhattan during rush hour. Then after training at night, I would go back home, which would take another 45 minutes or an hour. And what started to happen is I would often stay too late at work because I was working a lot. And by the time I got home, I would often be really tired and I would make all sorts of excuses to skip training. And so I just started training less and less and eventually took long breaks altogether. And the difference was friction. Training out on Long Island was very easy to include in my schedule, while training in the city required much more effort. So with all that being said, here's some practical tips. Pack your gym bag for the day so you can go straight to training after work or school. Train at a place you know is convenient enough that you can stick to going to on a regular basis. This may even mean changing gyms or jobs. Pick a time where you know it'll be convenient for you to train and you'll have energy. If you're not a morning person, don't force 6 a.m. classes. It's like if you're trying to eat a healthy diet, you're much more likely to fail if you have a bunch of junk food lying around instead of healthy food. Like, what are the odds you're gonna get out in the middle of the night to satisfy some craving for flaming hot Cheetos if you don't have it in your apartment? Eliminate the friction and other temptations and you're much more likely to train consistently. So with our consistent schedule, our next question becomes, what should be our focus each time we get on the mats? Number 3, focus on skill development. Being consistent is crucial, but to get the most out of your training, especially after learning the fundamentals, you have to actively choose to develop new skills. This is your responsibility, even if you have great coaches and training partners. Choose techniques you're working on from different positions. A bare minimum is to have techniques you're working on from both the top and bottom in guard, and to actively look for these techniques in your roles. The newer the technique is to you, typically speaking, the more skilled than your opponent you need to be to pull it off in training. So start from beginners and work your way up. Like, it's going to be difficult to pull off new techniques against opponents who usually kick your ass anyway. Although this isn't always the case, sometimes you'll find solutions or techniques that just fit perfectly into your game, so you can pull them off right away against people your level or even better. And when the techniques you're working on don't work, or someone gives you a different reaction, think about what happened and troubleshoot it. You can ask your coach, watch instructionals, and most importantly of all, try to recreate the situation again in future roles and see what works. And when you have potential solutions, this works best if you can try it again with the same person who gave you trouble before, but you try something different and see what happens. Of course, focusing on new skills means you definitely won't win every role, and that brings us on to our next one. Number 4, embrace failure and experiment. Like we mentioned earlier, with our focus on learning new skills means we need to be okay with losing roles. I don't mean don't try, but think about it. You're going to be trying new things all the time, putting yourself in uncomfortable positions, and you're not going to be using your A game, and you're going to lose pretty often. But this is really important, and in the long run is actually a key to get better faster. I've seen people who are very talented and quite good stagnate for years because they hit a plateau and were unwilling to put themselves in positions where they might lose. As a personal example of mine, when I was a purple belt, I wasn't comfortable standing when passing guard, especially closed guard. This is because when I would stand, end, I would often easily get swept when people would grab my legs. So I would often spend the whole round on my knees in people's closed guards, trying to maintain posture and break their grips. But realistically, I was just hoping they would open it up to try something. This is despite the fact my coach, Matt Serra, would always tell me to just stand up as it's the best way to pass closed guard. Eventually I came around realizing I had to learn this skill, but it really sucked for a while because I remember even like white belts were sweeping me all the time. But over time, I started getting more and more comfortable maintaining base, opening the closed guard while standing up, and now it's my favorite way to pass. Also, keep in mind, when you have specific things you're working on, you have to be willing to concede positions rather than fighting tooth and nail for every grip. This will let you work on counters and let you get into the things you're actually working on and trying to develop. But don't make it too obvious. You want them to think you're trying so you get proper reactions. Like, people act really weird when you just lie like a dead fish and give them side control. So since we're primarily focused on increasing our technique or skill, it means we're not focusing on other things. By the way, this is my own personal list. Are there any that you would change or include? Please comment below. I'm really curious, and I'm sure others are as well. Number 5. Don't treat belt promotions as a primary source of motivation. I remember back in my early 20s when I was a blue belt, I had all my belt goals planned out. Like, if I train 5 or 6 times per week, then I should get my purple belt in 2 years, and then my brown belt in another 2 years, and then I should easily get my black belt by the time I'm 30. Like, belts and stripes can be used to motivate. You see this especially in kids classes, but you shouldn't use this as a primary source of motivation. If you focus on belt level, it's outside your control fundamentally, and every school or coach treats belt levels differently. If you just focus on getting better at jiu-jitsu in the long run, like what we talked about previously, it'll come anyway. When your primary goal is to get some belt, then your incentives can become misaligned and it can actually hurt your training. Like, I'm ashamed to say it now, but I remember back in the day feeling really good about my training if I pulled off some move or submission and my professor saw it. And I don't think I'm the only one. Over the years, I've noticed that people tend to train much harder when the professor's watching, especially if they're close to a new belt promotion. And you've probably heard of the meme of the person who gets their blue belt and then is never seen or heard from again. Part of what is happening is that they feel as if they reached some great milestone and have earned some time off. But personally, I think part of it is some form of imposter syndrome where they have a fear of getting beat by mere white belts. So if we're not using belts to stay motivated, what do we use? Number 6. Use mastering techniques as your primary motivation. This ties back into the concept of skill development. Think of jiu-jitsu like a video game where you're building out and progressing through your skill tree. There are countless paths to explore and endless ways to level up. Maybe you're a high-level knee slice passer and you do it all the time, but you struggle when people pull you into half guard. That's your cue to work on half guard passing. Research a few techniques, then actively look for ways to force and find half guard during your rolls. You should feel motivated from that dopamine hit when you pull off that new half guard pass you've been working on, even if it failed 9 times before that. And this can be even smaller things, like forcing half guard instead of going for your knee slice. That too should feel like a win. The best part about this approach is that it never ends. You can be a black belt, but be a total beginner in something else, say K-guard. Learn to love that feeling of being a beginner, starting something new, and then seeing rapid improvement. Sure, you might suck initially, but going up that steep learning curve often brings the most satisfaction. We've talked about technique and motivation. Now let's talk about a huge factor that will make or break your longevity on the mats. Number 7, manage your health. Eventually, you're going to get injured from your training. In fact, you're more likely to get injured early on rather than later in your journey. This is because when you're first starting out, you don't know that much technique, you don't know how to move properly, and neither do many of the other beginners you typically train with. Years down the road, many lingering pains and problems you'll have to deal with will be from injuries as far as 10 or even 20 years ago, like issues with my neck and back. Had I managed them better and took them more seriously, I'd likely be in a much better place today. When you have something that keeps bothering you, especially if it's a reoccurring injury, there's often a root cause, like a bad movement pattern or muscle imbalance. For example, for a long time, I kept getting tendonitis in my right elbow over and over again throughout the years. But once I finally got some help and addressed this and found an exercise that worked, which were reverse curls, and I added this into my routine, I haven't had it since. Adding strength and conditioning is great for preventing injuries, but you have to keep in mind it shouldn't take away from your jiu-jitsu training. It's easy to become obsessed with lifting heavier, going to failure, but before you know it, you might find yourself yourself on some 5x5 powerlifting routine. And then you're training less jiu-jitsu and you're actually getting injured more because your body is overtrained. You can get stronger by focusing on full range movements and not pushing yourself to failure. Treat strength work as a way to keep yourself healthy so you can spend more time on the mats. Also take your diet and sleep seriously as well. Good nutrition and getting enough sleep and rest are very important for recovery and injury prevention as well. So with everything said so far, jiu-jitsu should be an enjoyable part of your life, not an added source of stress. Number 8. Keep perspective and have fun. The best way to stay consistent in jiu-jitsu is to enjoy the process. If you look forward to training every day, whether it's just to hang out with friends or work on new techniques, then training will always be something you want to do rather than have to do. Having training partners that are supportive and fun to roll with makes you want to show up more. Gossip and conflicts can make a gym feel toxic, but don't let petty issues distract you from why you're there in the first place. Focus on your own growth and development. Whether you're juggling your career, relationships, or other commitments, jiu-jitsu should be an asset in your life and not consume it. Taking time off to handle life events or handle an injury is just part of the process. If you approach jiu-jitsu with a playful curiosity, always trying to find new techniques and positions, jiu-jitsu will always stay fresh and exciting. Plus, you'll form deeper friendships that extends beyond jiu-jitsu with others who share your same enthusiasm. Anyway, that's all I have for today. Thank you for watching.